All right, so tonight I want to show you guys how to leverage Rhino Inside and Grasshopper and Revit for sort of an urban analysis exercise where you can also do a building analysis in Revit. So the goal is for more detailed programming and planning. We can use Revit and we can model floor plates and elevator cores and things like that. And for more of an urban scale massing analysis, you can use Rhino and Grasshopper. You can combine the two and you can sort of leverage tools in both to get the best use out of both the softwares. So we'll start in Revit, and I'm gonna kind of go back and forth, and hopefully this shows how to leverage tools for both, and then you can kind of mix these ideas and use them as you see fit. But the idea here would be if you were planning maybe a block in New York City, how could you go about it and how could you start to analyze it? Typically what I like to do is set up data extraction methods. So pulling quantities, pulling square feet, understanding whether or not things fit within the zoning envelope. I start there. And then once you start extracting that data, you can filter it and use it for different types of analysis. So I've set up this Revit model. This is about the size of an average city block. So forget exactly how big it is, but let's take a look. So I've modeled this out to be about 900 feet by 264 feet. And then I've just done sort of an average sidewalk on the left and the right. Imagine this is, an avenue and this is a street. So this is probably going to be treated as a wide street and this is going to be treated as a narrow street for the purposes of zoning. But we've got a nice big footprint here that we can start to work with. And what else I've done is I went in and created these levels. And we start with level 0, level 1, and then maybe we have a large, double height-ish lobby space, and then 12-foot floor plates going all the way up to level 34. And we'll see if we can get there with the zoning, but that'll be our starting point. It's always good to set up your levels in Revit to start at least, a good portion of them and try to get those set. And so we'll start there. And what I'm gonna do is get some floors in here, and we'll just start with some preliminary floors. So if I go into architecture, I've created a so in my ground floor plan here, I've created this, and I'm just calling this like a sidewalk, and then I'll just use generic floors for the next phase here. So I go to floors, I'll use a 12-inch generic floor, and then I'm just going to start modeling these out. Sorry about the choppiness, trying to just do some stuff at the house here, just had the doorbell ring. But anyway, we got our floor, call it a generic floor, right? And then just for the sake of simplicity, what I'm going to do is create a couple of these, and we're going to start just doing some program analysis, and later we'll analyze it for zoning compliance. So I'll copy this up, and let's say one of these is a retail floor at the ground floor, then maybe we have some commercial and some residential above. Let's do a nice little mixed use project here, and you can expand that list as you need, but we'll just start with those 3 programs for today. So these are all different floors, right? But they're not categorized by, are they retail, are they commercial, are they residential, what are they? I want to be able to label these, right? And there's really no sort of common parameter that I could use. I could maybe use comments or something, but I'm going to create a specific what's called a project parameter. So if I go into manage up here, project parameters, I can actually add in this, and I'm going to call this floor program. And I'm going to make this a common parameter. I'm going to make it a text parameter, and I'm going to group it under text. That's fine. I want to make it an instance parameter because I want to be able to control every floor independently. And then here, I'm just going to come and go to floors and select that. And what this is going to do is put this parameter into every single floor. So I don't have to go into every family individually and add the parameter. I can just have it dump this into all the floors. So anytime there's a floor in this project, that parameter will automatically get associated with it. And so this is good for, like at our company, we use Uniformat for all the coding. And so we just set up Uniformat parameters that work on every single element in the project. So this is kind of hard to change once you set it up. So just be very diligent here. Once you click OK, if I was to go modify this, there's certain things that I can't change. I could change the name, but I can't change these. And I can change the group, but I can't change the type of parameter. So I've run into problems before where if it should be a text parameter, but I accidentally select length, then I have to delete it and go back. So just be careful that you make sure you pick those right the first time. So I click OK. Now I have my floor program. And if you notice, if I click on a floor now, I have this text drop down and floor program is in there, which I didn't have before. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to call this retail down here. And I'll select these. Let's say these next few floors are commercial, and we might change it as we go up, but commercial floors. And then I'll pick these and call these residential. All right. Now that's great, but it's hard to now tell which is which, right? It's all just embedded in there and I can't visually identify which is which. So I could create duplicate families or something like that, but I actually usually don't like to do that. I like to use the family itself to talk about the constructability and the type of the thing, but not a parameter associated with that. But luckily Revit has something called filters, which will allow us to work with that. So I'm going to go into filters. I'm going to go to edit new. And I've actually created these already, so you know what? I'm just going to delete these and show you how to create one from scratch. So I'm going to call this floor program retail. And I'm going to come down here, click on floors, and I'm going to say floors, and then I'm going to come to floor program. And I'm going to say equals, and then I can actually come and pick retail. Click OK. Now what I have to do is add that filter in, and then I can override the appearance of that. So I'm going to go to the projection so that the surface of it will look different. You can have it change the cut if you're cutting in section, but I'm just going to create a pattern on it. I'm going to do a solid fill. And for retail, I'm going to use magenta today. We're going to use consistent colors between the two platforms. And I'm going to click OK. And now my retail shows up as magenta. So I can easily identify what's retail. If I came in and changed this to retail, it would change color. So now I just need to go in and set up additional filters. So I'm going to do some edit new. I can actually just duplicate this twice. And I'm going to just rename this floor program commercial. And then rename this floor program residential. And now I think I've got a good mix here. I just have to then, don't forget to come change this. So this floor program needs to equal residential, and this floor program needs to equal commercial. So now I've got my different filters for each one. I can now add in my floor program commercial, and I can add in my floor program residential. Commercial, we're going to use a cyan color for today. And then, we'll use kind of a gold orange color for residential. And for commercial, we'll use cyan. Great. So now I've got all my program color coded here. And I can create more, I can duplicate, I can manipulate these, and it'll just remain with that information. So now that I've got this set up in Revit, I'm going to start working in Rhino.Inside. So I'm going to open up Rhino. I've already got this loaded up and ready to go. So let me open up Rhino. I'm going to start with a blank definition here. And what I did before starting the video is I've set up a retail, a commercial, and a residential layer with colors that match. I have sidewalk. I actually just brought this geometry in because this is helpful for snapping to. And then I've created a zoning envelope. So let me show that. So this is a zoning envelope. It's not really, it's sort of just a conceptual one. I didn't actually do zoning analysis on this block, but I'm assuming that at the ends of the block, let's say we're in a big midtown, heavily commercial district, at the ends of the block, we can put tall towers, and then maybe mid block is more of like a brownstone / apartment scale. And then at the other end of the block is a super tall building. This one is capped out at a certain height. This one, the sky plane is allowing us to do that. So I've got this set. The one other thing I would mention is I found that this works a lot better is take out the underside of it so that it's just a surface. We don't want it to be a solid for when we start to get into Grasshopper. And we also don't want this to be right at the property line. So if I zoom in here real quickly, you see that it's actually set out. I set it out like 3 inches because we don't want our massing in our floors and everything to kind of, this is just an analysis. It's not a super precise, it's not for very, very precise modeling. And we don't want the face of the floors or anything to touch this, or else we're just going to get an error. So I've got my zoning envelope modeled out, and I'm going to start doing some zoning analysis using this here with the geometry out of Revit. So in order to do that, I first have to pull out this built-in categories component because I want to get all the floors. So let me go down here to floors. And then I'm going to go into category filter. I've got my category filter here. So now I'm just going to be able to pull my one category. And then I'm going to use my elements component. Which actually, let me just double check my little pre-built here. It's query elements component. So what this does is this gives us all of those elements, and I can use element geometry to help me visualize that. So there's all my floors from Revit now coming in. And what I want to be able to do is quickly check these against the zoning envelope to see if they are conforming or not. So if I come in here, I can say, let's pull the zoning envelope in. So we'll use a geometry component to do that. Okay. And this is actually a simple component, which is just a basic Grasshopper component called intersect. And then I like to use the mathematical surface BREP, or it might actually be in physical. Oh, it's actually, I'm sorry. It's this collision one many component. This is a really quick, it's a much faster way. It checks to see if the elements collide, but it doesn't really indicate where. So all it's do is checking collision or not, whereas the physical ones will actually give you kind of the intersection curve or the overlapping geometry. We don't want that. We just want to check, does it intersect? Yes, no. And then that's all we need. So the object for collision is our zoning envelope, and then the obstacles as a list are those. So what'll happen is we now have we're going to get a list of true or false whether or not they collide. So I've got true for my sidewalk, which is probably the base one, which we don't really worry about. And then we've got false for all these other ones that are down here, and then true for all the upper ones. So how I can visualize that is I can do a dispatch component, and these results, I probably don't need them grafted like this. I can flatten those. And so my list of, well, actually, if this is coming out grafted, then we'll just keep this grafted for now. So this is going to say my list of elements and the pattern. So the dispatch component is good because it basically will show me the things that meet the true and the things that meet the false. So all you're doing is putting a pattern into it and a list of objects, and it's matching them up, and it's saying that, okay, if this is true, false, then it will start to dispatch them that way. So now what I'm going to do is use one other geometry component, because I want all of the elements that do that. And I can actually hide the rest of this for now. And I'm going to hide my zoning envelope. And all it's going to do is show me the floors that are not zoning compliant. And I can go back into Revit, and I can actually see these. If I recompute, I might have to do a different view real quick that doesn't have the filter on it. So I'm going to come into 3D views, and I'm going to duplicate this view, and I'm going to come in, I'll call this zoning compliance. And then I'll call this program analysis. And in here, I will turn off these filters. So now I'm still getting a result where it's showing everything as red. I just need to go back into Grasshopper. Let me make sure. There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect here between what is happening in each one. Maybe because, let me hide the zoning envelope for a second. That might be shading what we're seeing here. I'm going to turn this off for now. Yeah, there we go. So this will show me the elements that are not zoning compliant. And one other thing I can do is I can actually come back into Revit here, or in Rhino, turn this on, and start to edit these and use the zoning envelope as a guide. And I can start to, like, pull back this curve here so it's there. Click OK. Now that is going to be compliant. Actually, it's not, because it's still on the side here. So we can start to first pull this back here. And now we've got, that will be compliant. So if I go back into here, hopefully this visualization works, that floor slab is no longer coming into this list because it's now compliant. So it's a good way of checking your geometry as you're modeling to see whether or not you are working within the zoning. And if you're obviously just following the zoning envelope, there's probably easier ways to do this, like just slicing up the envelope or something like that. But this gives us a little bit more freedom, and maybe what I'll do is I'll actually just delete these out, and I'll just copy this up. So again, we have our non-compliant. I can turn off the preview as well and go back into the program analysis. Maybe once they get into the upper level tower, that's actually where they start to turn into residential. And I can again tweak these. On the sides it looks okay, actually not back here. So it's a little bit of then sort of making these floor plans work, but maybe this tower then comes up a lot, steps back. And then let's set this one back. We could maybe like align all these to the face of this. You know what, and then just for the sake of trying to make this faster, I'll delete these out. And I'll just copy this one down because I know that this one fits in there. So now if I go back into my program analysis, turn that off, I have my kind of like beginning of my massing here of how the building would start to stack. To get back into this real quick, I forgot to kind of, you know, for the zoning envelope, what I did was I have kind of my street wall, and then I have my setback, and then I have another street wall, and then the beginning of a sky plane. And I just kind of played with those values throughout. So that's how I ended up kind of with this geometry. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that method of modeling things in Revit and checking the zoning compliance, what I want to do is I want to start actually checking for program counts. So I'm going to go and I'm going to come into the element, and I'm going to use the element parameter category, right? And I'm going to take my element, and then I'm going to use this parameter component, and this, you right click on this and you get a whole bunch of stuff in here. So I want model categories, I want floor, sorry, here I want to select floor, and then for my parameter I want my floor program, and it'll pull that project parameter into here. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do parameter floor program. And now I have essentially all the different elements coming through here and all of the different floor program components. So I have my nulls, my retail, my commercial, and my residential. I want to just start to sort by, let's say, retail first. So what I'm going to do is, why are these still not showing as compliant? Oh, they're sticking out the back a little bit. It's okay. You might want to go in and obviously fix those because you would get rejected by the zoning review, but for the purposes of time, we'll just keep it going. All right, so I now have, I'm pulling now the floor area, and what I'm going to do is I want to start sorting by these different programs. So I'm going to use the text match component or match text, and it's going to ask me what is the text I want to match. So it's these values. It's going to ask me what is the text that I want to search for. So I'm going to search for the word retail. So I'm going to do panel and then retail. Plug it into the R, and I get null, null, true, false, 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 right? Because I only have the one retail program. So that's great. I'm going to also use a index component because it's going to give me a list to search and the item to search for. So I want to search for, actually, hold on, let me just double check this. I want to do text match, match member index. I'm sorry, not item index. I knew that looked off. So I'm going to use member index. And I'm going to have my set to operate on, which is this. The member to search for is the phrase true. So I can use a Boolean for that. Boolean toggle, true. And it's going to give me the index of all the places that's true. And the last thing I need to do is do a list item component. And the list is all of these elements here, right? And the item is just this I. So it's going to give me all of the items that have retail in it. But this is not actually the geometry. This is just the element itself. So if I want, I can do an element geometry to grab that. So there it is. It's getting, oh, it's actually giving it here too. Is this it? Yeah, it's actually giving it there. Let me hide the, there's my item. So there's my element, there's my item, and that is my retail item. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to get how many square feet of retail we actually have. So I'm going to kind of replicate what I've done here a little bit, and I'm going to grab this element parameter. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this parameter here. I don't want floor program, I just want area. Some of them don't have it, which is okay. We have some null values in there, but that's all right. Because what I want to do is I just want to get the same item here. All I want, because the lists are in the same order, all I want is this number 2 value, because that's the same item index as this. So I can actually just take this same exact component here, copy this. So all I've got now is my area for that. Now this is in square inches, and by default Grasshopper uses scientific notation for large numbers. We don't want that, so there's actually a there's a component for formatting called format. And this is always a little confusing. I always refer to formatting numbers in Grasshopper, this page. This is a little bit confusing, but it is pretty helpful. And if you come down here, this is David Rutten. I don't think I've told you guys about him, but he's the creator of Grasshopper, and he's got always has really, really good responses on this forum. And so what he's saying is these are the formatting masks that will work in the formatting component, and this is the result you'll get. We just want this nice clean rounded number, so I'm going to use 0:R, with curly brackets around it. So I'm going to do panel, curly brackets, 0:R, capital, close curly bracket. That's the format. And then if we check, I want to make sure that it's going into the right place. So I'm going to go to data 0. Let me close this. Then let me just see what's coming out of here. That is not right. Let me just double check what I did here. Sorry, I refer to my cheat sheet again. This seemed to work. Well, before I do that, one thing we need to do is 0. I'm sorry. What's going on here? Format 2. I'm going to try a different component real quick. There's this this function component, which is this evaluate. I'm going to try to do this as well. That is not working either. I think there might be something wrong with my syntax here. I'm just going to cut and paste this and see if this gives us a better result for some reason. Maybe it's got to come right out of there. Yeah, you know what it might be? It might be the panel is messing this up. So if I take this value right from there, yep, it's the panel. So for some reason, if I use this panel and feed it in, it doesn't give me that. If I just bypass the panel, I get what I'm looking for. So that's what I want. And then there's a couple things I need to do. First, this is in square inches, which we don't want. So we need to divide this by 144. And that goes into here. So now that's my square feet, and I can actually just round this as well. So we get a nice clean number. Integer to the nearest x. The rounding doesn't seem to be cooperating here, so let's round it on this side. Finally, we got what we need. Okay, cool. So that is my retail square footage. One thing I'm going to add, and I can actually come in here and just call this retail square footage total. All right, so now I know my floor plate, that's how much my total retail square footage is. I could just pull that right from the area here, right? Because I only have one floor, but let's create another one where we have multiple floors. So before I do that, I'm going to organize this definition a little bit. It's always good to, keep these clean and explain what's going on. I'm going to do a quick organization, but I would normally do something a little bit more involved. But this down here, what this is doing, and like I said, I like to name these. This is the zoning envelope. So I know it's geometry and it's a zoning envelope. this is geometry, and this is non-compliant floors. This here is basically extracting floor geometry, so I'm going to hit Control G, and then I'm going to right click and just name this and call this extracts floor geometry. And then I'm going to grab this, I'm going to hit Control G, and I'm going to say grabs non-compliant floors. All right. This whole little piece here finds retail program and adds, you know what, let's say finds retail program from Revit and adds square footages. All right, and hopefully what I've done is set myself up so I can just cut and paste this because of the way I've formatted this, and I'm going to change this from retail to commercial, and we should be able to actually just get all the total retail square footages here. So I'm sorry, this should actually say total commercial. So what I've done though is set this up in a way that it can just easily replicate to get other program types. Now I want to know the total. I don't want to know just what they are one by one. So what I'm going to do is add a mass addition component. And you might have to do this for retail if you had more than one floor of retail. And then actually just grab this, plug that in there. I can right click on the group and add this to group. So now this is part of the group. And now I have my total commercial square foot calculator. Control C, Control V, grab this, and I'm going to call this residential. If I can spell it right. Great. Now I have my total residential. Total residential square foot. So now I know my total square foot for all of that, and if I wanted to, I could do a mass addition, and I could pull this value, and this value all together, and this is my total building square footage. Now I have to make sure that all my floors are being accounted for. If I don't label something one of these three, then it won't get, calculated here. So maybe to be safe, I'll call this total program square footage. And if you come back to Revit, this is 814,827. I could actually add in a shaft. Let's see if this works. I can come into architecture and I can add a shaft in. And if I, just add an elevator core, let's say right in the middle. And I didn't really measure it out, but I can actually grab this, pull it down. It's I probably don't want it. Actually, yeah, I can cut the ground floor. Pull this all the way up, cuts all of that square footage out. And now if I go back to here, it's reduced it by the difference, how much square foot we've cut out of that. It'll also reduce all of our retail counts as well. So as you start to refine this further, you'll be able to start to determine what are your net square footage versus your gross and things like that. Okay, cool. So that is how we would bring Revit stuff into Rhino and analyze it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start layering some more massing level modeling in through Grasshopper and Rhino, and then that will help us sort of visualize the whole project as a whole. So one thing that I can do in order to sort of visualize this stuff better is I can start to grab these floor plates and preview them differently, so I can see where my where my commercial program is and so on. So I'm gonna just grab all this for now, turn that off, make sure that's not being visualized. The only thing that's being visualized is these non-compliant floors. So I'm going to add a custom preview to this, and then use a swatch, and I'm going to make this red so that I immediately see a non-compliant floor. It gets flagged as red. That's how I would be able to do that. And for the sake of us, maybe let me go back in here and clean this up a little bit, so that maybe if I just scooch this forward a tiny bit, let's see if that's good. Yeah, great. So now we have all of our floors are compliant. But now if I add another floor and it's not, it'll get flagged with red. I can just take this whole same custom preview component, copy and paste this, and I'm going to plug it into my items here. And you know what? I actually think there's this element geometry component will really help if I use this. Plug that in there, and then I'm going to change, this is residential. So I'm going to change this to match my residential color up there, which is like, I think I can eyedropper it, hopefully. Yeah, eyedropper that. So now I've got my residential program clearly delineated. Then let me copy and paste this. I'm going to grab this geometry as well. Pull this down. Element geometry, commercial, eyedropper, cyan, and then, oops, let me grab the element geometry as well. And then this goes to retail. Okay. All right, so now I've got that. The last thing you might want to do here is, this is kind of just a preview thing, but you can do edges, B-rep edges, and then just do curve. I've done this before where you then just go grab all of them, put them in here, and then do like a custom preview where they're all black maybe, and then you get a little bit nicer visualization where you can actually see the edges of the floors. So preview off, I'll grab this whole little bundle here, bring this down, bring that there, bring this down, bring that there, and now I can sort of visualize it a lot better. Great, so now we've got a nice little tool where we can model floor plates in Revit and see how it impacts program and things like that in Rhino. Okay, so the final thing that we're going to do is we're going to start modeling out some stuff at a massing level here and visualize that. And what I might want to do is I might want to use that same edges tool to view my zoning envelope, just so that it kind of helps me see it a little bit better without it being, completely overshadowing the whole thing. And this is going to be pretty simple, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start modeling out some things like retail on the ground floor. So I can snap to, the one thing that's a little tricky about this is you can't, snap to things that are in Revit unless you bring them in. So you might have to just eyeball it, or you can bake that component into here if you want to. You want to just make sure it doesn't get double counted. So let's just say we're going to do retail all along the whole entire ground floor here. You know, just for this, select that curve. I want to make sure, I'm going to use what I like, the set point component. Set everything in the Z to align to the world. That'll make sure it's all right at the top of the sidewalk where I want it. And then I can just extrude this up, and let's say this is like 20 feet. So it aligns with the top of my other program. And then let's just do quickly this. I'm actually going to do just pure, especially here. What we'll do is we'll grab this and pull this in so that, like, up to the edge of the block here, this is all residential. So I'll move this to the residential layer, and I'll actually scale this down 1D to, let's say, 15 feet. Let's say this is like high ceiling apartments. So we'll model out a few of these. These like okay. So we've got like our residential there, and then I will model out some commercial here and then some residential above quickly. I'm doing it floor by floor here just for the sake of trying to count the square footages more easily. I think that's probably going to be the best way to do it as of now. In the future, I can show you how to kind of slice up masses, but this allows you a little bit more control in terms of how you space the floors and things like that. So let's make this a 12-foot commercial space. Change this to commercial. My massing is a little bit off here. I think it was, you know what, I'm gonna have to just, I think, redo these residentials quickly because my modeling was a little sloppy. So let me, that's why the set point is always kind of good tool to use. Let's say this is like a pure commercial tower over here, just for the sake of let's just start there. All right, so what I want to start doing is checking this for zoning compliance. Like, we can obviously see this is not working here. So I'm gonna do what's called a geometry pipeline, and we'll start doing the residential. So the geometry pipeline will just automatically pull in any geometry which is on that layer. So save the asterisk, because the asterisk will kind of, it doesn't have to match exactly, it just has to contain that text. So if you have this buried in sublayers, it'll go into that sublayer and grab it. I found this works well. And then just make sure you select that, which is BREP. Otherwise it won't know what type of geometry you're looking for. So now it's selected all of those residential floors. And I'm gonna just take this, and for the purposes of keeping it clean and separate from Revit, I'm actually just gonna copy this and do the same thing we did before, which is I've got my, you know what, actually we can keep the same zoning envelope, I'm going to bring that down to here. And then my collision is actually going to be all my residential geometry. So that's going to be here. And then my dispatch is going to be this list here. So now I can see all of my non-compliant zoning, all of my non-compliant geometry. I've also set up this Grasshopper visualization, which will help sort of only show wireframe for geometry, but show you the Grasshopper equivalent. So that helps to quickly visualize these things. So let's see, maybe if we pull this in 3 feet, will that help? Let me try. I didn't expect every volume to be breaking the envelope. -3 feet. Where is it breaking? These lower ones should not be. Let me just check to make sure that this is working properly. Residential, dispatch, non-compliant floors. True. Oh, I'm only getting one value back for true. So I think what I might need to do is graft. I'm going to graft this like the other one is grafting. Object, that. Okay, that makes more sense. These lower ones are compliant. So this one, once it steps back up here, this one's non-compliant, and that makes sense. So let's push this back like 20 feet. Push it back 20 feet on this side. And you can, again, get more precise with this. So now we have everything except for this upper one is compliant. So I can just kind of pull this back, copy this up. This one I think is out the top, so that will be that. And if you wanted to even get some double height space up here, you could scale this whole thing up to maybe get some taller ceilings in your penthouse. And again, I'm not too concerned with it being super precise because it's just a massing study. But now I'm starting to get the count of the residential and the retail in the center of the block. And I will do, the same thing that I've done here. I'm just going to copy this, and same thing, I'm going to call this retail to see if that's compliant or not. And that looks good. Great. And then let me turn this back on. And then I'll have office, or we'll have this commercial. Cool. So you can see that this is all very like non-compliant up till the highest point. And what I could do if I wanted to just be kind of lazy about this is I could actually just try to, let me see if this works, is select all of this and do like a Boolean intersection where I could say just give me, I don't want to delete my input quite yet because I want to keep my zoning envelope. So show me that and that, the intersection. Oh, the intersection failed. It might be because these are too close to the edge. I don't know. Oh, it's actually showing me down here it didn't like something. This is not, I'm sorry, this is not a solid. So it's not a solid, so that's why we're not going to get that result. But we could start to, use different modeling techniques to sculpt this back. So if I go into like wireframe mode, I could draw, let me just turn this off for a second. Now, I'm not saying this is the prettiest solution, but for the purposes of just trying to get this modeled out, maybe you do something like this. This is, I love set point in a situation like this as well. I can set my point to Y, which would be here, extrude this across, go to shaded mode, select all of this. Almost there. And then Boolean difference out this. So starting to get there. And then maybe you do the same thing in the front, or maybe you start to sculpt this a little bit more on the side. Again, it's kind of your design decision about how to go about complying. But I'll let you keep tweaking that. But for the purposes of what we're trying to do, if I come back here, you can see we've got a lot of non-compliant floors except for this one up top, so we would need to go in and sculpt that. Now, what you can do here, and you can also do this with the Revit stuff, is you can only count the square footage of compliant floors. That'll help give you a more accurate representation of what the square footage is, right? Because if you have a non-compliant floor, you might not want to count that. You only are going to count square footages of compliant floors, and that'll help you, not over model by accident and end up with something that is not feasible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, using this same dispatch component, I only want to grab the floors that are compliant. So I will start up here with my residential. So I'm going to grab these, and I have those. What I want to do is get the bottom floor plate and get the area of that. So I'm going to do a deconstruct brep. Deconstruct brep. Okay. So now I have all the different faces of each one of these volumes, and if they're rectangles, I should have 6. If they become different shapes, I'll have more or less. But I'm then going to get the area of each one, and the only reason I'm going to do that for now is I want to get the center of it, because I want to make sure I get the bottom surface. And I'm going to then make a point, or let me use an XY plane, which is going to be just sort of a plane at the 0. I'm going to move that down. I want to move it down like, 100 feet or 1,000 feet. It doesn't matter. Let's do negative 1,000 inches for now is okay. That plane is, if you actually right click on this, or you use the center mouse, you can go to zoom object and it'll take you to where that object is in the scene. So it's like kind of in the middle, down low. And so what I can do is I can do plane CP, and S is the sample point. It's all my samples. And then my, you know what, actually let me use pull point. Pull point does something similar. So my point to search from is going to be all of my centroids here. The geometry that pulls is going to be my surface. And so I've got a bunch of points now and distances from them. I want the first closest distance, so I'm going to sort those points. K is the value. A will sort the faces. So I'm actually going to take these faces, and then if I go list item, the list is all of these. The item is 0. So I'm going to turn off all my other visualization for a second. And I'm going to actually hide all this. So that is actually just my bottom surfaces. That's just my bottom surface. And so if I get the area of these now, and I do the same thing that I did before, which is grab the divide by 144, the format, the rounding, and the mass addition, and the panel, and I plug this in. I get my area for all of my, I have to just flatten it at some point because it's coming in different things, so I can flatten it here. So now I've got my total commercial square foot only for compliant floors. And that's only for my geometry here. So to put a little bow on it, I could also take this value, come up here, grab my other commercial square foot total here, and I could see what is my total commercial square foot for the entire development. This also probably needs to be flattened, and now I have 1,113,246 square feet of commercial for the project, and that's only using compliant floors. So like if I come down here and make this floor compliant, let's see if this, actually let me grab this to see the change here, or we can just zoom in there. So then if I come and I take this, make this compliant, it is not, is it not? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm working on the residential right now. I completely, all my residential is compliant. So let's actually, you know, the best thing to do is to actually come here. This is your total commercial square foot. Let's take this whole thing, copy and paste this, and sorry, this should be, sorry for the mix-up, this should be total residential square foot. So then therefore, this mass addition should not pull in the commercial, it should pull in the residential. Plug that in. Plug this in. And now we have our total residential, which is like 1,029,130. Commercial, let's get this sorted out. So I cut that, but again, because I only have one cable going in, it's nice and easy that I can then just pull this. I only have one let's do this commercial. There we go. Pull this down. there is some issue here with text to number. Let me see where that's coming from. You might have some null values or the empty values. Yeah, the empty values, it doesn't like the empty values, so that's all my non-compliant floors. So it's throwing up a red error, but that's okay because there are lots of ways I could do that. I could come here and I could add like a clean tree component, which will then clean it out, but as long as it's calculating properly, I'm not too worried about it. So this here is still, that one looks like it's okay now. So let's see if my total commercial square foot here changes. Yep, so that'll change based on this. So if I start to get these more to work, that's going to go up. So this is a way that I could start to evaluate the entire, development potential. Let's just, for the purposes of making this work, let's select all these. And I'm going to scale 1D this way. And then scale 1D this way. So I'm leaving a lot of square footage on the table, but now I've got like all of my compliant square footage in there. And you copy and paste this, tie it into the residential, or sorry, into the retail, and then you can pull all this together, and now you can get a pretty good sort of visualization of your project. If you wanted to give it a little bit more cleanliness, you could do a custom preview on this geometry, which is your compliant geometry, that reflects the, if this is commercial, just grab your little custom preview component here, bring that down, and plug this geometry into there. Turn off all this preview, and then if you were to like hide this layer, you're now only seeing your compliant geometry previewed. You could use that little edges trick as well if you wanted to. Same thing that we did up here. And there you go. All right, so now that you have this data, you can start to analyze this, play with this, cut from the building, see how it impacts everything. If you wanted to even go a step further, you could figure out what your FAR and your actual allowable square footage for the whole entire site is, and then you could start to kind of evaluate that way. But that's it. Hope it's helpful, and I'll talk to you guys soon.